Hi, I'm Daniel. I work for Trend Micro, and today I will show you the result of an investigation that involves an application developed by Pakistan government on Shadowpad malware family. So during this talk, after introducing a bit this case, we will show the MSI installer that we found out, so the MSI format. We'll discuss some tricks to help for pivoting on Shadowpad samples, so with a bit of history of Shadowpad and then the newer updates. Then again, an overview of this campaign, and we'll discuss the attribution, so how we struggled attributing this campaign before we conclude the talk. So it all started in March of this year, where we found, we noticed a detection hit for a file named msquery.dll in an uncommon directory. So the detection dated back to September 2022. And because we have been monitoring Shadowpad for a long time, we knew that this file name is commonly used for loaders of Shadowpad. Of course, this does not mean that if you see msquery.dll, it will be Shadowpad, and not all of the Shadowpad loaders are named like this, but still it raised our attention. And then we noticed that this DLL was embedded in a cap file, and this cap file itself was embedded in an MSI installer. And when we looked at the metadata of this MSI installer, we saw two tags. One of them was eOffice, so at the time we had no idea what it was. And the other one was a 4 letters acronym for a Pakistan governmental entity that we had already came across in the past when investigating Indian threat actors. So this definitely was interesting to us to see a Shadowpad detection in a Pakistan MSI installer. So what is eOffice? So that's what we search about. If you look at it on the internet, you will see that it's an application that aims to help the Pakistan government to go paperless. And so this is some graphic that I found in the LinkedIn account from this developing agency. So what you can see here is that since 2019, this eOffice application is supposed to be deployed in all of the 14 ministries of Pakistan. On a message I saw that last year is that all the government of Pakistan instructions are actually delivered now exclusively on eOffice. So this actually shows the sensitivity of this application on why it is a good idea from a threat actor's point of view to target this application. So let's see now a bit of the MSI format. We searched it for this eOffice application and only found two versions of it. The old one was 1.1.20 and the newer one was 2.03. And actually, the malicious installer we found out delivered the newest version. Very important to note is that the installer is not signed. So this means that in the MSI format, you can actually, with the proper tools, you can modify the installer, add some custom actions without the need to have the source code or the files that were used during the build of the MSI installer. Also, what we found out is that this installer was, as far as we know, only sent to Pakistan governmental entities, and it is not supposed to be downloadable from public sources on the internet. So the first question that we ask ourselves is, how did the threat actor retrieve actually this MSI installer in the first place? Because it's not supposed to be public. So unfortunately, we don't have the final answer to this question, but we have a few hypotheses, possibilities. So the first one was that the threat actor found it legitimately on the internet. So what we did was searching for that installer ourselves. And actually, we found an official Pakistan governmental website that offered the oldest version of eOffice. And this same website offered the newer version, but only starting in April of this year. And if you remember, the attack happened in September 2022. So we believe that at the time, in September 2022, there was no public source for this legitimate installer. Also interesting is that after we published our report, so our report was published in July, we noticed how the Pakistan government removed that link to the downloadable version that we found before. So this confirms the fact that it is not supposed to be public or publicly accessible. Also, we found out that this legitimate installer was uploaded to VirusTotal, but after we published the research, so this means the threat actor couldn't retrieve it from VirusTotal either. So there is a second possibility. The threat actor could have compromised the Pakistan governmental agency that develops eOffice, so it would be a supply chain attack. So actually, this was our favorite possibility when we did the research and we published the research. But to be honest, now it changed. So now we don't believe it is the most probable hypothesis. Why did it change? Well, first of all, because after we publish the research, we get in connection with this developing agency, and they, as far as we know, they did not find any compromise of their build environment. So this is important. Of course, they could have missed something, but I think they had much pressure on. I'm sure they looked everywhere they could. And the second reason is that after, again, the publication of the research, I connected with some researchers, discussed about this threat. They had a different visibility than I did. And now I know that there are at least 3 different MSI installers that are backdoored, that drop different payloads, but that connect to the same CNC. So to me, it does not make sense if the threat actor could have had access to the supply chain. Why would they build 3 different installers? I think 1 would be enough. So now we don't believe this is like the most probable hypothesis. The third hypothesis that we believe is the most likely, actually, is that the threat actor retrieved this legitimate e-office installer from a Pakistan governmental entity that already had access to it. So this implies that the threat actor first compromised a Pakistan governmental entity, then retrieved this, saw actually this installer, modify it, and use it to spread out to other Pakistan entities. So now let's analyze this MSI installer itself. So in April, when we got the legitimate installer, we compared it to the backdoor version. We found out that 3 files were added to it. So one of them was named Tariq Windows Data Validation.dll. Actually, it was not a DLL, it was an executable file. A copy of a Microsoft Stein file named applunch.exe. And actually, this file is known to have a side loading vulnerability, and it will side load the DLL named mscreate.dll. So this was the second file, which is malicious DLL. And this DLL will load the third file, which is mscreate.dll.dat, which actually is some kind of binary blob that turns out to be the encrypted Shadowpad payload. But we will see that more in detail later. So in the MSI format, you can also add some custom actions. And here in the bottom of the screenshot, you can see that there is a custom action named Tariq Validation that will run this fake DLL that is executable from the install folder. And there is this like type value, and this particular type value ensures that the executable will be run within the system context. So this is kind of clever in the threat actor side, because of course you are installing an application. So if you get some like UAC prompt for enter the administrative credentials, you will not be surprised because you are installing an application. So it makes sense. This custom action is added to this install execute sequence. And you can see it's like right after the installation of the files, but before the creation of shortcuts on write registry values. So let's see now some tricks related directly to Shadowpad. So for those who don't know it, Shadowpad is an advanced malware that is used in targeted attacks. It was first found in 2017 by Kaspersky in a supply chain attack that affected the NetSarang software editor. It was also seen the next year, again in a supply chain attack against ASUS. So both of these attacks were very advanced, and they were both attributed to APT41. So at that time, until 2018, let's say, if you would see a Shadowpad sample, you knew you could directly say it's APT41. But then in 2019, it changed. And now multiple Chinese threat actors are using this malware family. One of them, for example, is Akhlut that we presented at Virus Bulletin localhost in 2020, but there are many others. So nowadays, you cannot directly attribute to a threat actor only based on the fact that it is Shadowpad. So the first version involves only 2 files. So this legitimate signed executable that would sideload a malicious DLL. And this DLL would, in memory, decrypt and load a shellcode. And this shellcode would load some plugins. So these plugins would be the ones that would actually embed the features like for retrieval of the files or password dumping or whatever. This shellcode actually is encrypted with a simple custom algorithm. So here on the left, it's the compiled version, but I know some of you prefer to read assembly directly, so it's on the right. But honestly, don't care much about the algorithm itself. It's very simple, like with some multiplication, subtractions. What's important here is that there are some hard-coded constants. And so these constants actually can be used for correlation of the samples. So the strings and configurations are encrypted with the same algorithm, but with different constants, but still with constants. And we found out that multiple Shadowpad samples would share those constants. And so you could actually see that multiple samples belonging to one threat actor would have the same constants over time. This is not always 100% true, because sometimes you will see one threat actor that will change the constant. So let's say they use one constant for a few weeks, few months, and then it changes. But then all the next following Shadowpad samples will have the second constant. What we believe here in that case is that this constant is hard-coded in the builder of the Shadowpad. And so probably when they change the builder, update the Shadowpad version or something like that, it will change the constant, but it can still be used for correlation. There is only one case where we noticed two different threat actors sharing the same constant. It was Tick on Tonto or Akhlut. But we believe also it's interesting because it shows some kind of administrative connection. So probably they got the builder from the same source, maybe some agency or something like that. So then in mid-2020, there was version 2. A threat actor named Akhlut started using it. In this case, there were not 2, but 3 files used. So again, the legitimate signed executable would sideload the DLL. The DLL will actually decrypt and load this binary blob that I mentioned before. So this is still the case nowadays. This is the same scenario in the latest Shadowpad version. And what's interesting here is that once the payload will be decrypted and loaded in memory, it will be written in an encrypted form in the Windows registry, and then deleted from the file system. So this means that if you arrive too late, or if you only have the DLL actually, and can only have access to DLL without having access to the Windows registry, you cannot have the final payload, the CNCs, and the stuff like that. So you end up with a loader without even knowing what it loads. So it's very smart on the threat actor side. This kind of division in 3 files is very common for plugins or this kind of stuff, but the fact that the payload is deleted is kind of specific, as far as I know, to this Shadowpad version. In this case, the configuration file is encrypted with a custom algorithm. Also, like, the algorithm itself is not very important. It's some kind of multiplication, addition, some XOR operations, but it had one hard-coded constant. And as far as we know, in this particular version, all the threat actors that used this variant used the same constant. So you could not use anymore these constants for correlation of samples. Then in March 2021, there was an update, and this is like the latest versions that we saw. And they changed this custom algorithm to an algorithm using standard Windows API. So they will use AES CBC 128 bits encryption key. And the thing is that this encryption key will change for every encrypted item. And all of these like encryption keys will be based on one single 16 bytes long encryption key. So let's say an example. Let's say you have this like 16 bytes long encryption key that will not change for every sample. It will be unique for every sample. It will not change over time. And then you append it like 2 or 4 bytes suffix that this one will change for every encrypted item. Then you calculate the MD5 hash. You pass it to crypt derived key with a new initialization vector. And then you have your encryption key. So this is interesting because we found out, this is an example. So in this case, for example, this blue string here will be encrypted with this suffix. This blue string will be encrypted with this one, and this one here will be encrypted with this suffix. So as I mentioned, it changes for every encrypted item. So what's interesting is that we noticed multiple samples shared the same base encryption key. So this 16 bytes long encryption key is shared. And we found in total 10 different base encryption keys and more than 30 Shadowpad loaders using this encryption algorithm. And out of those 10 encryption keys, 2 of them were related to our threat actor. So we could actually retrieve more samples than we had in the beginning just with this technique. So this was kind of helpful, and I hope it can be used in the future for more Shadowpad correlation. Unfortunately, we could not attribute most of these Shadowpad loaders to any threat actor because in most cases, as I mentioned, we didn't have the payload, the final payload. So now let's discuss a bit of the campaign, some interesting points that we saw. First of all, the post-exploitation tools that were used. Actually, we found traces of Mimikatz, so very common, in the Windows help directory. So then we noticed there was a RAR archive created within the same directory. So all the TXT files would be added to this archive. 4 days later, we saw that archive was exfiltrated through a very simple PowerShell script using the bit service. And we could see that this IP address that is listed in the PowerShell snippet was under control of the attacker from April 2022 to October. So this gives an idea of how long the operation lasted on the threat actor side. So 6 months. About the targets, we found 3 different targets, all located in Pakistan. 2 of them were government public sector related to finance. The e-office application was part of the infection vector for both of those victims. The third one was a telecommunication provider, and we could not find the infection vector because the attack was older, and so we had less telemetry for it. Interestingly, while we were writing these slides, of course we checked back everything and we found a new victim. So we had no time actually to properly investigate this case, but we know it's an oil and gas company in Argentina. So actually a totally different location in the globe, and totally different industry. So this shows that the focus for this threat actor probably changed a bit on the last months. So if we find anything interesting, we will of course publish about it soon. An interesting trick that we found in this attack, in this campaign, was related to network stealth actually. So this in the malicious scenario with the backdoor e-office installer, we mentioned that it will drop the Shadowpad malware, and this Shadowpad malware connected to this local IP address. And as we extracted the Shadowpad malware, we had the payload, we had the configuration, we could check the configuration. It actually contained this IP address, so we are sure that this IP address was the command and control server for this Shadowpad sample. And then when we retrieved the actual legitimate e-office installer later on, we run it in a virtual machine, and we check the connections, and we saw again a connection to the same IP address. And at this time we were like, what happened? How is this possible? So we double checked, well, we believed, okay, maybe this is maybe also malicious. Maybe the threat actor used another way for infecting this other installer, maybe. So we triple checked actually, and still this connection happened, and we didn't see anything malicious in this legitimate e-office installer. So in the end, what happened is that we did some man in the middle that allowed us to see this request. And so this legitimate request actually, if you cannot see, is a GET request to this local IP address /v1/application/check for application update. So this is probably some e-office mechanism for auto update or something like that. So it is actually a legitimate request. So you can see even some like custom headers like sender e-office client WPF, the application version 2030. So this is very like a legitimate request, and so if you are actually in a network that uses e-office, you will get used to see a lot of these requests. So it is very clever on the threat actor side to use the same IP address for CNC, because then on the network side you will not pay attention to the request to this IP address. So our advice here is to look at the type of the request. So if it is a GET request, it will be the legitimate one, because on the Shadowpad side, it will be a POST request to actually the same IP but different URL. So now let's discuss a bit more about the attribution of this attack and how we struggled with Chinese threat actors. So everyone here that worked on Chinese threat actors knows that it's very difficult to attribute the attacks, mostly because they share all the tools. Most of the TTPs are similar. So it's difficult. And as I mentioned before, we know for sure that Shadowpad is a shared malware family, so we cannot rely solely on this for attribution. So we searched it for other links, like on the infrastructure side, for example. So we found these 2 domain names, and we searched for them and found they were listed in 2 public reports. One of them was written by Kaspersky, and they would mention targets in the industrial telecommunication sectors in Pakistan and Afghanistan. So this is perfect. It's like it fits exactly what we saw in our campaign. Unfortunately, in that report, there is no strong attribution or links to any known threat actor. So it was not useful for our purpose of attributing this attack to a threat actor. The second one is from Dell SecureWorks, and it attributed, it lists a lot of Shadowpad samples. It's a very nice report on Shadowpad. On the IOC part, there is one Shadowpad sample related to our threat actor, and Dell attributes that to Bronze University. So what they call Bronze University, it's the Dell naming, is what we call in the Tremicro Earth-Losca. And then we are not very convinced by this attribution to Earth-Losca. Why? Well, because first of all, the domain names that I mentioned before do not match the usual registration pattern that we know for Earth-Losca. So usually Earth-Losca will use some random subdomain names. They use a particular registrar that is different in both of these domain names. So it does not match the pattern we know of. Also, the Bronze University payloads listed by Dell are all named log.dll.dat, except for the one that is linked to our threat actor that has a different name. On all of those log.dll.dat samples, use the old encryption mechanism that I mentioned before with this constant. And then the one that we were interested in is named also differently and is using the newest encryption algorithm. But so there are two possibilities. Either Dell did a mistake, which happens and it's fine, but also it could be one example where one company would actually have their own naming, and so maybe what they called Bronze University embeds this activity on what we call Earth-Losca doesn't. So we are always complaining that we have like 10, 20, 30 different names, one for each company for threat actors, but maybe this is one example where it is good that we use different names because what we call this, they don't call the same. I mean, the overlap is not 100%. So still, we had no help for this attribution part, so we searched for further samples or TTPs that could help us to attribute the attack. On two of the victims that we found, we had nothing relevant. So on the third one, we found actually too much things, like 3 different custom malware families, so it was kind of a Christmas tree of APTs in there. And we found one dropper from one threat actor called Calypso, another malware called DidRat that is attributed to Space Pirates by PT Security, and another malware that we believe belongs to the Drifting Cloud threat actor. All of these threat actors or malwares are allegedly Chinese, but are not, at least we don't believe they belong to the same threat actor. So what we try to do is make a timeline of the events when they happen to maybe try to see some connections between those malwares. So we can see in this graph that the first malware appearing was the Calypso dropper in November 2021. Like 4 months later was the first relevant file for our investigation, the Shadowpad file creation. 1 month later, there was the second Calypso dropper. The next day, DidRat appeared. So here, maybe with this timeline, maybe the only connection that we could make is that it could be that DidRat is connected to Calypso threat actor. We actually give more details about this on the paper, but for this investigation, it was irrelevant, but still interesting to see these kind of links. And then the Drifting Cloud malware appeared 1 month later, and Shadowpad appeared again later. So when you look at this graph, there is no evident connections between those malwares on the Shadowpad. So we decided that it was not relevant enough, not clear links enough between those malwares, and we chose actually not to attribute this attack instead of making an attribution that could be proved wrong in the future and that we could not prove actually. Our opinion is that probably multiple threat actors targeted the same company. So let's conclude this talk. The fact is that there is an application that is developed by the Pakistan government for the Pakistan government, and it was used as an infection vector by an advanced threat actor. So we could not find exactly if it was a supply chain attack or how it was found, etc. But the fact is that it was used for targeting the Pakistan government, and actually it was successful. Also, we have seen that the Shadowpad malware keeps being updated, and it keeps being shared by multiple Chinese threat actors, so this is also interesting. So we believe this threat will last for long yet, and it's interesting to check the evolutions, because also we try to show here that even if this is a shared malware family, there are still some tricks that can be helpful for sample correlation, attribution, or stuff like that. So it's not impossible, although the malware family is shared. And the last two conclusions would be that, well, it is always, in our case, cross-company collaboration was helpful. So we were glad that we could discuss to other fellow researchers that have a different visibility. This helped us to kind of discard the supply chain attack scenario, although it proved us wrong, but it's nice to be wrong when you have the data. I mean, we prefer to have the good information. And also, the last point would be that even if you see some custom malware at some victim, it doesn't mean that it's linked to the other malware you see there. It could be just that multiple threat actors targeting the same company. So you need to find further evidence. So you have to be careful about this. And with that's it. So if you have any question, I will be glad to answer them.
Okay, nice on time.